The rain was merciless that night in New York. Sheets of water slammed against the cracked pavement, neon lights bled into puddles, and the city that never seemed to sleep felt strangely hushed. Amid the chaos, Ethan Carter sat huddled under the rusted roof of a food cart, clutching his worn-out backpack like it was his last possession. At 24, life hadn't gone as he had imagined. A degree in computer science had promised him a future, but after months of job applications, rejection emails, and interviews that led nowhere, the only thing Ethan had gained was a creeping sense of failure. He thought about his parents back in their small hometown in Ohio, who had worked double shifts to fund his education. He thought about the pride in their eyes the day he left for New York, and he thought about the crushing disappointment they would feel if they knew their son, the first college graduate in the family, was on the verge of giving up. As he sat there, drenched and defeated, an old man shuffled toward the cart. His jacket was frayed, his sneakers worn thin, his baseball cap pulled low over gray hair. Yet there was something unshakably steady in his gait. He ordered a cup of coffee and sat on the bench beside Ethan. For a long while, neither spoke. The rain filled the silence. Finally, the old man glanced at him. "You look like you've lost a battle," he said, his voice raspy but strong. Ethan gave a bitter laugh. "Battle? I think I've lost the war." The man nodded slowly. "I've felt that way. Once in Vietnam, once at mile 20 of the Boston Marathon. Both times I thought I was done for." Ethan blinked, caught off guard. "You ran Boston?" "6 times, the man said with a faint smile. "Never won it, but I learned something out there on the pavement. Do you know the story of the last mile?" Ethan shook his head. The man leaned in. "The last mile is where the race gets real. Your body screams to stop, your legs feel like lead, and your mind tells you it's not worth it. That's where most people quit. But if you keep going, step after step, you'll finish. And finishing, son, matters more than winning." Ethan stared at him, uncertain whether to be comforted or annoyed. He wanted results, not riddles. But something about the man's eyes, sharp, unwavering, the eyes of someone who had endured, made him hold back his frustration. "Are you saying I should just keep going?" Ethan asked quietly. The man sipped his coffee. "Only you know whether the race you're running is worth finishing. But if it is, then the last mile is where it all matters." Before Ethan could ask his name, the man tipped his cap, stood, and walked into the rain, his figure swallowed by the blur of neon and storm. The next morning, with the old veteran's words echoing in his mind, Ethan opened his laptop. He decided to treat this day as if it were his last mile. He wouldn't send one job application, he would send 10. He wouldn't just update his resume, he would rewrite it, make it sharper, clearer. He wouldn't just wait for opportunities, he would create them. He listed companies, cold emailed CEOs, connected with strangers on LinkedIn, and even offered to work on small projects for free, just to prove his skills. Most ignored him, some replied with polite rejections, but one message from a small Brooklyn startup struggling to build an app said, "We don't have a big budget, but we can give you a chance." It wasn't much. The pay was barely enough to cover rent, but Ethan said yes. The weeks that followed were brutal. The startup was chaotic. Deadlines missed, investors frustrated, and a team too small to handle the workload. Ethan often worked until sunrise, fueled only by dollar pizza and determination. There were days when he thought of quitting, days when he remembered his friends who had secured stable jobs and were living comfortably. But every time he felt close to giving up, he remembered the man's words, the last mile. So he kept going, fixing bugs, writing code, suggesting features. Slowly, his contributions started making a difference. The app stabilized. User reviews improved. Investors noticed. One evening, after months of relentless effort, the founder called him into their tiny loft office. "Ethan," he said, "I know we started you on a small project, but you've become the backbone of this company. I want you to lead our development team." Ethan was stunned. He wasn't just being offered a promotion, he was being given trust, responsibility, and a chance to shape something real. 2 years later, the little Brooklyn startup had grown into one of the fastest rising tech firms in the country. Their app had millions of downloads, investors lined up for funding rounds, and their team had expanded to over 100 employees. At the center of it all was Ethan, the once broken graduate who had sat under a food cart in the rain, ready to give up. He often thought of the old man. He had never seen him again. Sometimes Ethan wondered if he was even real, or just a ghost from his own desperate imagination. But real or not, the lesson remained. Success doesn't always lie in the first steps of the journey. More often, it lies hidden in the last mile, the point where everything in you screams to quit, but you take one more step anyway. Years later at a conference in Chicago, Ethan shared his story with young students. He told them about the nights of doubt, the taste of failure, and the stranger who had reminded him not to give up. When he finished, a young girl raised her hand. "Sir," she asked, "what if I don't know whether my race is worth running?" Ethan paused. Then he smiled, the same way the old veteran had smiled at him years ago. He said, "Then run until you find out. You'll never regret finishing the miles you were meant to run, but you'll always regret quitting too soon." That night, as he left the stage, he stepped outside into the rain. The streets shimmered with neon lights and puddles, just like that night long ago. And for a fleeting moment, Ethan swore he saw a familiar silhouette, cap pulled low, shuffling away in the distance. He didn't chase after it. He simply whispered, "Thank you," and walked on. Because he understood now. The old man's lesson was never about running or winning. It was about faith. Faith that even in the darkest hours, if you keep moving forward, step by step, you'll reach the finish line meant for you. And sometimes that one extra step is the difference between a life of regret and a life of triumph. Remember, life doesn't test you at the starting line. It tests you in the last mile. The moment you want to quit is often the moment right before your breakthrough. So whatever you're facing, don't stop now. Keep going. Your finish line might be just one step away.